Okay, so we wanted to talk about space in terms of, I guess, in relation to our own practices. So does anyone want to start? Like, does anyone, I think some of us might have, based on the talk we had yesterday, like, to some extent, similar themes. Like Sarah, I think me and you deal quite a bit with domestic space in our works.
Yeah.
And also, I think, feminine or, like, womanly spaces.
Yeah, definitely. Isn't it? I find it quite interesting actually when I'm thinking about these spaces, because they can be anywhere, but we associate them with like certain spaces within like home settings. I always refer to the kitchen as, you know, but then I always think to myself, I mean, there's a different politics there obviously in itself, but I'm always thinking about what happens if the kitchen becomes this isolated space as well, if it's just like tools in the kitchen but placed somewhere else. So I think actually during this time, I found that it's given me more time to like challenge my own practice and kind of understanding of space, for me anyway. And I've also struggled at the same time, because I'm definitely somebody that relies on certain spaces, like site specificity, in order to like generate installations that I do. Does anybody else feel the same way? Does anybody feel like space is a very kind of big part of where they do or where they situate their work?
Well, my pieces, they are actually for practice. For to make them, I need a space. They are not really domestic, but the final work could be also very domestic. And now in this situation, I'm thinking that I can use them in a domestic space, like reinvent the sculpture again, like putting them. Actually, a piece of art, I think it could be, unless it's not a huge installation of something, it could be actually domestic in any way. If it's digital, it could be domestic. If it's something that it's touchable and it's not too big, it could be domestic. So actually it's not too much restrained, the space, I would say.
I think for me, like before the pandemic, I was beginning to toy with this idea of space and what space means. Space for me, in my practice, means viewers being able to access an installation and kind of navigate the work. And I guess viewer and space is an integral part of my practice, which in some ways was compromised because of lockdown. However, I guess we're all in this weird space, right? We are in these curated rectangles, and professional has now come into the domestic space. So it's almost like these blurred lines between what is professional, what is domestic now, and what is private and what is public now. So I guess it's the blurring of those lines for me that are quite interesting, especially when I'm looking at kind of videos that are leaked on the internet or appropriating content from the internet, and then how do we kind of access work in our domestic spaces? How is, I don't know, I guess I'm interested in the connections between the virtual, the professional and the private. I feel it's very blurred now in terms of space.
Yeah, and that's something I find very anxiety inducing, like at the current moment. The fact that my private sphere is now where I conduct all my schooling, all professional things. And like obviously to an extent, like, I have a background up now, but I'm still in my home setting. And I think there's kind of a point where I viewed always the domestic space, and obviously not everyone did, but I always viewed it as kind of a place to relax and kind of get away from the work part of my life. And now I'm doing both at the same time. And how does that impact how I interact in my private and domestic life? And it's almost like there's this performance going on at all times. Like the fact that even I knew I was doing this today, so even though I'm at home, I'm like, okay, I want to put on makeup because I know it's getting recorded. I don't want to look bad because I know I'm going to be on screen, even though I'm actually just at home.
Well, space is actually a very magical thing. Like, I think it can be different very from time to time. Like in your room, in the daytime, you feel like it's limited. It's just a small room, a small square. But in the night, you can feel the limitation of it. It's like a very big spaces that you can think a lot. You can just think. and another interesting part is like some specific spaces for us it really can change our atmosphere of our works. Like that time at the cookhouse, but I have an entire work for me. It's like it's just my one work that stand here for the audience to look at. But in the middle room, there are like three people's work that joined together in one spaces. It's like they create a new artwork because of the space, not because of the artwork itself. So the space does do a lot of things to the works or to ourselves. Yeah.
And actually, any domestic piece of art work which looks like domestic, when you have the special side, so let's say the cookhouse gallery, so I have the same piece which was presented there in my house, and it's a completely different story, so it's really not the same. So anyways, space and size specificity, it's something that it's perceived differently.
I didn't think.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't think about this before, that we're technically just curating our own work, and very, very isolated curation actually of our own work in our own spaces. And like, it's true, as soon as we put this work with other people, other works, it changes the work that the way it's read, but also the way the other works are read, and the room as well. So I think that's something that I suppose we're all missing. I didn't even think about that being something that was important, but that's definitely a really great point that was raised. Just anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I think something interesting, like talking about site specificity, and even now in terms of isolation, like what does it mean about doing work, and maybe it is in a site-specific location, but the likelihood of someone seeing it is like outside of photographs is not going to happen. Like I did one a couple years ago in my cottage, so it's a private residence, and I photographed it and I filmed it, but nobody could come see it because it was like 3 hours away from where my university was. So it was all just photographs. So that's the only way it's ever existed for people except me. So again, we're kind of moving into this situation where, yes, I could make site-specific work. I could go outside and do one in my back garden. I could do it somewhere in the village. But no one from the uni, and probably most likely because not that many people live here, are really going to see it by the time I would take it down. So if it's only communicated through photographs, to some extent, is the artwork actually the physical thing that you've made, that installation, or is it the way you photographed it? And does that become the space that you're navigating to show the work to people? Like I also think about Andy Goldsworthy's work, for example, all of the installations that he does in nature. They're all shown in photograph, unless you're like, I don't know, lucky enough to stumble across it after he's finished it. Nobody's going to see it in person. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, that yes, it's sculptural work, but you have to present it in this two-dimensional space. And I think that's what's going to happen as isolation kind of continues. And how does that impact the way we're communicating that artwork?
Yeah, so we are coming to the idea of Nisa finally, so that you need the viewer. And then, as you say, Kristen, the work becomes the photos, actually. So the documentation of it, it becomes the work itself. So not the exhibition and not the piece that you've done there. So somehow even the way and the things that we are doing, they are already in another space, in a way.
I also think it's about, when does art become art as well? Because is it only when the audience or somebody is seeing it, isn't it? But I also don't agree with that sometimes. I also think it's a personal thing. I actually always have felt like, I think else's reaction or their feedback is always secondary for me, I found, which is really weird because a lot of my work is about involving other people. But actually, I think more than that, I think it's my own personal things I want to fulfill, like these things that I want to talk about and express. And if it translates, that's like a bonus for me. It's not the priority, I would say. But maybe it's for different works. There's different activation needed. But does anybody else feel like the audience is like the important part for their work?
Oh, I think yes. The interaction actually it's important because you did something, you had your feelings, you had your emotions and your thoughts, and could be that it's perceived completely different. And then your work, it's richer with this new idea, and maybe you will find another way after this. And if nobody see it, then you rest and you are just with what you are. I don't know if I said it, if it's understandable what I wanted to say. So, I mean, the work, when it's viewed, then it's regain another idea, maybe, I don't know, another form even. So, I mean, a completely other meaning could be even. As my works yesterday, yes, Nisa, we were talking. So, because I was working on something, but it's perceived completely different. And if I didn't have the viewer, I would never know that maybe, yes, this part is a part of work as well.
I think it's also the conversations that art creates, right? Yeah. Art in activation creates a narrative, creates a conversation, creates a dialogue. And I think that is like a fundamental part of a lot of art, isn't it? Be that in its process of making. So I guess with Sara, like, you know, the community aspect of it, the act of making your work, you are involving people, and that's kind of where the activation is occurring. And for some, the activation is occurring in I guess, the experience of the work, and that kind of activates it. But I don't know if I'm going to digress and reel me back in, because I'm like known for this. I've just been thinking about Nan Golding's photographs, and I'll put them in the chat, and then we can maybe put them into the video as well. And also Tracy Emin's earlier work, you know, obviously her notorious bed, and then this photograph called I've Got It All. And the reason why I'm thinking about these pieces is because they have these strong connections with kind of being curated, or rather made within a domestic space, and then they're put into a gallery. And I feel almost like we're in this strange place in time at the moment, or space in time at the moment, where we are making at home, and potentially we are exhibiting at home. I don't know, I think that there is some sort of a connection with these sort of works in terms of space and the domestic, and how, I don't know, domestic work, when it's put into a gallery, kind of is glorified in a way, or kind of verified. And how do we as artists, kind of in this COVID generation, how do we verify or activate our work when we're making, curating, exhibiting in this digital space?
And I think something interesting about that, and as well as also the whole idea of an audience or spectatorship, is you can go into this whole notion of controlling the space. So if you're only allowing people to view it through photographs, you're kind of controlling their interaction and actually not being able to physically go to that space. You've made that decision. You're like, no, they're not going to be able to physically experience it. They're only going to be able to experience it images. At the same time, if you did something online, like Nisa, how your website has a password on it, it's only accessible to those you've given consent to, but that doesn't invalidate the work at all. In fact, it probably actually adds another layer to the fact of like, oh, why is this not fully accessible? And I think we can also talk about the fact that those works made in a domestic space are then removed from them and put in a gallery. And it's like, is there almost like this element of control of how much you're seeing from that domestic sphere that's now moving into a gallery setting?
It's like you have set a very exact angle for the audience about where they can see this object. Like if it is a photo, people can just see this thing through one angle, but if it's in a gallery or something, people can just see it around it. It's like totally different. But I don't feel is there a bad or good in it, because we all want to present to people what we want them to see, right? So if I set an exact angle for them, it's like they just follow my lead to preserve all these things.
To play a devil's advocate here, then are we saying that if it's a photograph, in some ways that's easier to exhibit in an online space, and all other works, be that performance, live performance, videos, installation-based work, sculptures, paintings, are they then compromised in the digital space, or is there a way that those sort of works can also kind of live and be experienced in the digital space?
That's like a really good question, because I think that's something I really struggle with, working three-dimensionally, especially if it is just like a bronze sculpture, things like that. I always find, because especially when I work in that material, I'm really relying on the weight of it, of you actually being able to touch it and feel it and pick it up. Especially with the objects that I'm making, normally they're meant to be a lot lighter than they are, and you've shifted that material, so people being able to interact with it is really important. And there's actually no possible way on an online platform to ever get that sense of weight, unless you literally just had it written next to it what the weight was. But even then, it's not the physicality of it. And I do think that's the problem with like what's going on in this period of time right now, is a lot of physical work. Yes, it can be put into an online environment, you can have the photographs, but I do think it suffers from the fact that you're not seeing it in a physical space. Whether that physical space is a gallery space or if, you know, it's site specific, if it's kind of meant to be tactile, even if it's a painting, if it's just the way in which you've painted it where there's a texture and things like that, maybe you're not actually going to touch it, but it reads very differently in a physical space than it does online. And I do find you can lose that. And even if you were to take a sculpture, 3D render it so you could make it as three-dimensional as possible in an online space, you're still missing like a lot of the senses. You're never going to be able to touch it.
Yeah, so that I wanted to say, there is just one sense. So you have just the eyes, and the others, so you can touch it, you can't weight it, you can smell it even. So if there is a painting, there is texture, then a smell. So you have the weight of this work. And if this is just a photo, so it's just a photo. So, and mostly when you are in exhibition, you have some emotional experiences, like going around, see it again. And when it's photo, so I'm talking about my experience, it's like it's a photo, the next one, so somehow it's not really touching. Even photographs are also how to say, a kind of art. I mean, they are art, but when we are used to work in three-dimensional with pieces, with made things already, so maybe it's our expectation, it's our thing, how we perceive the work, and we want that everybody see it the same. Yeah, because if there is something digital, then nobody is expecting that you will touch or you will have, so you have the same feeling. But when it's an object, you are expecting as an artist that it will be taken as you did it. So,
you know what I've been thinking about recently? Is it the artist's responsibility during this time to just adapt? Because we're talking about things like weight and sculpture, I suppose, in particular, and that's so important. But I wonder if it's our responsibility to just not, I don't want to say not make those works, but also find ways that this can be adapted somehow, because I suppose the situation can't change. I suppose it's us and how we adapt. And I wonder how that works, because it's true. I think they're such important works for different reasons, both of yours, Lucia, and Kristen's. But I suppose it's like, I don't know, actually, I don't know how we would go about that process of how can I translate these similar, or as same as ideas, or, you know, insinuate weight or text or texture, whatever it might be, without the kind of restriction of the digital. Because I'm also thinking about the fact that the public site as a place to exhibit, but again, there's this thing of accessibility. Not everyone can even access those sites. It's pretty interesting when we're talking about the gallery. Actually, this is a second point that I was thinking about, is that who was accessing the gallery in the first place? Was it really that open before, even before coronavirus and anything else? Actually, I don't even think even then people were accessing art the same way, and not everybody the same way. There's social, economical, class, everything different that happens, and who gets to access art in the first place. And maybe this is kind of the situation brought about some sort of reset, that we can now consider those things because they're now, it's open space to just exhibit and think, and also obviously have conversations as well about it. I don't know, what does everybody else think about that? I don't.
Yeah, I think that is the benefit to the idea of this like online gallery space, and kind of having to navigate these things to a degree just as yourself as an artist, because it is true, like gallery spaces really aren't, I mean, I'm talking more about my experience back home in Canada. Like there's really one section of the city where it's like a ton of galleries, but there's almost like to some extent a bit of hostility with some of them. They're not so much open to just kind of waltz in and see, and they're not really like advertised like that either. Like a lot of them are really meant for collectors. It's a very much about the art market more than the showing of art or trying to kind of have an audience in the general public. Like that's more reserved back home for the bigger galleries. So in Toronto, that would be the Art Gallery of Ontario. And then like there's the other ones which are specialized in Canadian art, but it's kind of these more mixtures of public collections than it is so much about contemporary artwork. So I think what's nice about the online platform is the fact that yes, this is accessible to anyone who wants to see it. And there's almost, it's almost like a judgment-free zone, if you know what I mean. You can go in, it's just you on your computer, so you're kind of just looking on your own. But I think what's really nice about it as well is the fact that, again, it's that level of control of you as an artist. Like what we've just done with the MAFA International Festival, that's all run by us. We all control that. And I think to an extent, when we're talking about sculpture and photographs, that's something I think when you've been working as a sculpture artist, you've been dealing with a lot of the time anyway, because when you send work to apply to shows and everything like that, you're always sending them as photographs. You can't ever really get them to see it. So it's been a struggle that whole time anyway, because you're trying to communicate everything about this 3D object in what they usually give you, like you can send like 10 images, so you can maybe send, if you're sending in like 3 works, you have to kind of try and figure out the best way to split up those images so you can showcase the work the best way possible, or try to film a really, really short video. But again, you're still going to be missing a lot of what that piece has to offer. So I do think it's a difficulty, but it's been one that's been happening for a long, long time. So it's kind of like, do we just kind of keep going with it, or try to figure out something that can help adapt it?
And I found that actually really frustrated, because I feel like when all this artwork are online, people are just so easy to lose their focus on one thing. But if you like standing in a space in a gallery, and it just has some, I don't know, some strength to let you just stand here to look at one artwork for like a long time, but you won't look the same artwork online for a long time.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt. I've said this for a while. I think Rothko would be so boring online.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually, because I saw his work when I went to when I was in Austria, and it's like you can't grasp it
Yeah.
online at all.
Yeah.
Like
And
just the sheer size
actually
of some of the work.
Yeah, and actually people who never saw a Rothko in real, they never understand what is this. So what kind of art is it? And when you are in Tate, for example, in this room, so there is a completely different experience, and you will never have it online. So that's a good example of it, really.
Okay, I have to go, guys, because I have lunch, but please feel free to continue the conversation. It's been great.
Yeah. Okay, Kristen.
Okay, bye.
Bye. And actually, I think that now our mission is really to make ourselves in a way accessible, and to think what could be changed. So, and as I was, for example, making these 3D pieces, maybe now I have to think how to do this to have the same so to make the same feelings, or to communicate in the same way even online. So it's the thing that we now to have to rebuild ourselves in a way, so because it's nothing else to do.
It feels sad to do at the same time, because you almost, those things are what make your practice so, you know, they're personal to you, and I think that must be difficult. I at the same time think, what is access? Like, what do we mean by access? Because, and who is our audience? Because I think we all have different ideas of who we want to access our work as well, don't we? I think we all have somebody or something or a group or whatever it might be in mind when we're making, even if it's not consciously. I definitely have a conscious access point. Mine's always been I always judge my work by how my parents react to it, or like.
Is it me or?
No, I think Sarah is frozen. Nisa, and you are mute.
I need to stop doing that. I just talk and talk and talk, and it's on mute. Oh, I'll just carry on. Like Sarah just kind of just spurred me into something. I think there's this issue of representation, which has always kind of been in galleries anyway. Like, you know, certain communities being underrepresented, certain communities not accessing, you know, the art world because it's so far away from people. And I don't know, like there are some, in some ways the internet can help bridge that gap, but in other ways it's also further isolating people, I think, and adding to that marginalization, because I guess I'm thinking about community or art galleries that are within communities that are, you know, diverse or marginalized. So for instance, I'm thinking about this art organization called New Art Exchange in Nottingham, and it's in this part of Nottingham that is really ethnically diverse, right? And every year they have this open call and they invite artists, and there's just so much color, different cultures, different heritage, different religions being kind of represented. And when you see the audiences coming into these galleries, like I have never seen so many brown people in a gallery before. You know, like I go to London or like another city or Derby, for instance, and I don't know, I feel like there is an imbalance. And then these smaller sort of organizations that are in really kind of diverse areas, they pull in these crowds of people that are from marginalized backgrounds. And I think, yeah, like, of course, we all have the internet, we can all access things, but there's something about in physically being able to connect with communities. And I think that is something, you know, art galleries not always achieve, but, you know, some do.
Yeah. And also, I like the reaction of people. So I like the private use, actually. When I'm somewhere and maybe nobody knows who is the artist, and I love to see the reaction of people, and that's somehow an energy for me. So that's something that makes me create something more. And when you are online, you just give it and you forget it. and you don't know what is direction. And in a way, it's like it's no direction for yourself in a way, like just giving it like done and that's all, you know. Even maybe if it's more accessible in this way, actually, yes, because for example I can share my works now, like this exhibition that we had, the festival. I couldn't share it with my family, with my friends from Moldova. They would never see it if it would be live. But then live, I will have more colorful feelings with all this, you know. So it's this balance in a way. So we have pluses there and minuses here. Welcome back, Sarah.
My computer completely shut off. I have no idea why. So sorry, everyone. So sorry. I'll just you carry on. I'm just listening.
Yeah. Oh.
And I feel like, sorry. Yeah, I feel like although our starting points always focus on our own emotion, our own thoughts, but eventually we always want, and we always very happy to feel like our work are connected to the audience. So actually the audience, even though we tell ourselves don't take so much importance in the audience stuff, we should focus on our own stuff. But audience is actually really important. So in the real spaces, like what Lucia said, we can I really like to hear what people talk about my work, but without they knowing that I'm the artist. It's really interesting and it's really useful, because if people just face you, they won't talk really honestly, because they will care your feeling. And if they don't like it, they won't talk. They won't told you. Yeah. So that's the space work. The space really give a hand of us.
I think though we need to, as artists, we're always kind of adapting, readapting, reconfiguring, you know. For a physical exhibition, we're always thinking about, you know, criticality, like where should my place be located? What sort of eye level should it be at? What's the distance? We're always thinking about proximity and the experience, right? And I think in some ways we need to apply those kind of that sort of criticality to online work as well. I know that we're all kind of desensitized to images online and JPEGs online, kind of this act of scrolling, like we're all kind of, it doesn't create that personal element to it. So maybe we need to be a bit more devious about things. You know, how are we gonna show someone it's light, it's really light? You know, is it then almost like another piece of work where there's a performance with this work, you know, where it looks really, really heavy and then maybe it's kind of, I don't know, thrown in the air or passed to someone? And, you know, how do we show that something is light? How do we show that something is meant to be experienced in a certain way? And I know, like, the internet has certain things, doesn't it? Like, for instance, I wrote down a note here that yes, you can try to kind of manipulate the viewer by giving them maybe some text or a video that accompanies the work to kind of give them a bit more background or information about the work. But at the same time, there's certain things that are out of your control, right? I guess scale. So we can put a JPEG online that needs to be experienced in a certain way, but you, the viewer, can zoom in and zoom out. So that's something that can't really happen, you know, in the physical space. And also, like, another point is almost like copyright. So in a gallery, you can kind of ban mobile phone use or images being taken or films being taken of your work. But online, I feel like I can do a screen recording of, you know, Sara, your video, and have a copy of it and distribute it if I wanted to. You know, like, I shouldn't do that, but it is a possibility. So it's almost like, yes, there are tools that we need to do as artists to be adaptive, but then we also need to acknowledge the problems that the digital space presents. Sorry, that was like 20 points there. Sorry.
No, but
No, that was a really great. Yeah. No, I was going to say it's a great point towards the end because I've been thinking a lot about people that don't credit these days. The credit is so important with what we do, with the labor that we put into work. And you're completely right. If anything, it should be easier to credit work when it's available online, but it's also easier to also just take or steal or manipulate and then use as your own. Something as basic as, I think this has been going on for years, people fishing online, as in like fish, like online fishing. And I think that actually does play very much into the digital of like now there's digital exhibitions, because you can have an entire, there's people that have adopted entire artist personas which are based in the digital. There is actually kind of no grasp of kind of this reality as well that comes into this, and that's more of a, I don't know if that's an issue, because that's some people that's their practice, but also I think it does present an issue because actually there's nothing authentic. And I do think as soon as something's in a gallery, there's something that allows it to distinguish between something we've seen multiple times because you can scroll through or whatever online, and then something that's suddenly isolated or presented in a very specifically curated site, because you're right, there's such a vast kind of variety of imagery that we're just accessing daily. I think we have too much access, personally. I feel there's a lot with mass media that I use the word desensitized completely. Like, I think that we've become desensitized to imagery and just anything, even violence, people have become desensitized to because of that. And I think I wonder how work that is presented digitally gets the same weight because of that, because we're so used to, oh, I've seen that before, but it's not the same thing. They're two completely different things. Things like that. I'm always thinking about that. Like, everything feels like a copy of something technically, but it's also not. Again, I think I went on a waffle. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I hope that makes sense. But yeah. Does anybody remember Dave's lecture as part of Train about the digital space being political and a place of protest? Because I thought that was the most interesting thing, and he referred to it in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically during June, when naturally people using the online space to platform kind of, oh, here's where this protest is going to take place, come join here. This kind of rallying of people through the online space was like really incredibly helpful. And even right now, it's being used as a tactic to stop people from doing this. At the moment, there's the farmers' protest going on in India. And what's happening is the government have, for the past 3 days, banned internet in India, specifically in New Delhi, where the main protests have been going on. And they, because the active protest site of the internet is being used to get people together to say this is happening, give them information, but it's also being used as propaganda through the people in control, the people in authorities. So it's also about who has access to the internet. This is what I'm trying to get to, that actually I really think art and censorship go hand in hand. I'm thinking about like Nisa's work, like how do you feel like that cites itself online, because things get deleted of Instagram, for example, things are so censored.
Not just from the Instagram, and
well,
it will be perceived completely different, not like in the site. So it's a completely different meaning, I would say. Even
because it's not like we have complete control, is my point. If things we put online, even if they're like our own things, I wonder what happens there and how do we control that. I don't know.
I think there's so many issues with it, isn't there? There's also the algorithm, right? Depending on my searches, my phone will, or my internet will kind of feed me certain bits of information. And that's something as well. Like, how do you get your work out there when there are so many algorithms in place that might mean that your work is lost completely or doesn't get any access? I think space has been like a really interesting topic for us, hasn't it? And it's got, what we realized from this initial conversation is that there are so many strands that we could perhaps dissect and inspect as we kind of go on?
Well, what I think that we need really both spaces. So it's not that one is better and the other one it's not, because there are pluses and minuses in both of them. But as space-specific work, it's a space-specific work, and anything you put in a gallery, it's a piece of art already, and it looks like. And take it in domestic or put it on internet, and it has a completely different meaning already. So, and when it's on internet as a piece in the gallery, then it has a weight already. And if not, somehow it's a piece, it's a craft, for example, I can say for my works, for some of them. It's something that you did at home and I have it on the table. So it's already not art, really. So it was nice to talk about it, guys.
And I feel like this is going to be an ongoing thing that we're thinking about throughout the next few months, probably until December, I feel, you know, and especially towards this MA show and everything really that's happening as things develop as well, and as technology develops as well, because I do think the augmented reality has become such a widely used thing now, and even more so within the arts I've seen, which I fear, because I'm so adamant that humanness is so important. But I suppose it makes sense at the same time. But I'm very adamant about touch and kind of texture and all these things personally. But yeah.
And I miss people, not just galleries. I mean, it's interaction with real people. Then when you can touch, smell again, let's say.
Yeah, I think we've lost senses, honestly.
Yeah.
I think there are all these techniques, aren't there, that we're all trying to scramble and kind of like use just for the work to feel alive or more alive, you know, in some way, shape or form. But I feel like the general consensus amongst many artists, or perhaps maybe it's an art student thing, I don't know, is that live element is significant for artistic growth and experience of work too. And also, Sarah, like when you lost connection, we were talking about representation a little bit, and like I feel that physical spaces create a pocket of, I don't know, rather a space for conversations to occur.
Definitely. I've also found personally though, suddenly I had family members from across the world that could see my work, and I didn't have that before at all, that access. In fact, all my family are in India. I have some like dotted around the UK, but it's kind of rare. And so I actually think it almost opened that audience up for me, which is what I was trying to say before I left. And so, I mean, it has its like positives as well, but absolutely, I think conversations, they just feel way more different in the physical, like I definitely prefer calling people. I'm one of those people, I prefer calling people, for example, than ever messaging them. I just like to hear the tone. You know? It's like that small things that make a difference to just feeling more comfortable, I suppose, because I do think art's about comfort as well, in whatever way. It's also about being comfortable, but you know, yeah.
I think that was a good talk. It was a nice first.
Great talk.
Yeah, thank you. It was actually a pleasure, not just a magazine.
Yes, it was. We should do them all like this. Just like have conversations about it. I really think these give time. Obviously, like I know magazines about like talking to one another. That's like the main thing, right? It's us trying to like connect with the people in our group and find like these common grounds. And I do think conversations help that in whatever way. So like, why not? I also think like sometimes individual submissions kind of allow for a more individualized approach in general towards work, because we're doing that anyway. We're doing that on the side. Like,
Yeah.
why not use these as like this kind of opportunity? I don't know. That's just, it's nice.
Actually, yesterday I was thinking that I hope we will be open already in the summer, and maybe we can do a performance together, Sarah. The last year I started a cooking book, for example, international one.
Wow.
Actually, I have to say to our peers as well, maybe you want to take part in this. And I wanted to have a performance in the festival as well, so like offering wines and some Moldovan foods. And I thought that maybe when everything is finished, like not everything, but I mean when it will be accessible, maybe we still can do something like this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. Yeah, I love when it's not a big dinner party. I think that'll be cute. We can do it in the Chelsea outside courtyard thing.
Yeah.
That's
But
cute.
I hope we will be allowed, because even for the festival, if it would be not in lockdown, Patty was saying that, it's a bit difficult because you have to know from what the products are coming. So if it's a delivery, it's okay. But what means a delivery? Nobody in the delivery would do what you did yesterday and what I'm doing at home. So it's a completely different story. And then it's not the same weight. So because I see cooking also a form of art, actually, and even sculpture, if you think. So it's something 3D made, and they are really artists in the restaurant. Like, so, I mean, it's a kind of art. And then when you have a delivery, where is the art? It's just to put it on the table. So I don't know.
No, it doesn't have the same effect. Exactly. You could give somebody a recipe and they would never cook it the same. That's what I've always felt. I don't think you can ever replicate the same thing. Even the same person can't. Every time it tastes different somehow.
Yes.
I think but that's obviously the best bit about cooking, I think.
But maybe that's also an artistic thing, because I never repeat the same recipe, so it's not really the same. So every time I'm adding something new, and sometimes my husband asks me like, do it like you did, I don't know, the last time. And I don't know what I did the last time. So
definitely.
This time it will be completely different.
They always say you can't get the same brush mark, something as small as like stroke of something. Unless you obviously, I suppose you print it, but it's never the same.
I think cooking is like being a chemist, isn't it? Like you're like mixing, and these like I think it is always changing, and also what you make, just like a painting or any other piece of art, is impacted by how you're feeling when you're making it.
Exactly.
This idea of how much love is in a meal or in a dish. Like, I think that is so true. Like when I cannot stand my kids, I'm sick of them. Food tastes shit. Maybe take this out of the recording.
Well, you say it now, but wait until you have them gone, then you will miss all of it. You'll see.
Then I'll become an amazing cook just to bring them back home, right?
Yes.
Like, I'm so hungry about this topic. I haven't eaten anything today.
Go have lunch.